Good afternoon, everyone. Depending on where you're joining us from, I'd like to extend a good morning or good evening. I know we have folks from the UK, including one of them on the panel here today. Actually, we have about 1,300 registrants, and just from scanning the attendee list and registrant list, I saw over 25 different countries and jurisdictions represented on that list. And I think that shows the global interest and global importance of the topic that we're probing today, which is ongoing KYC, rather than seeing this as a one-time deal, exploring how to do this on a continuous basis and why the time to do that may be now. So thanks for being here. Thanks for being a part of this presentation. I'm Brian Sabota-Kindle, the VP of Product Development with the Association of Certified Financial Crime Specialists. And my job is very easy today. I'm going to set us up. I'm going to do a quick introduction to us and some logistics, and then turn it over to our moderator, John O'Neill, who along with the panel of experts will be exploring this topic. So just in case you're not familiar with us, I'll very briefly touch on who we are and what we do. We're the Association of Certified Financial Crime Specialists, or ACFCS. We're a member organization, and we exist to serve you, the community of professionals who work to detect and prevent all forms of financial crime, whether that's money laundering, fraud, corruption, sanctions, tax evasion, cyber-enabled fraud, so on and so forth. And as you might imagine, KYC is one of those issues that touches on all of these worlds. So we exist to provide tools, resources, and training to you to help you do your job better. We don't just kind of cover all of this. We look for the common vulnerabilities, common intersections, common issues that touch all of these forms of financial crime detection and prevention. And we offer membership, which includes access to a whole host of informational benefits, webinars like this one, exclusive members-only news and analysis. We administer the Certified Financial Crime, or CFCS, credential. And we provide live and online training resources too. So again, thanks to everyone for the time and attention. Please visit our website, www.acfcs. I probably didn't need to say the www, but acfcs.org to learn more about us if you're not familiar with us. Just a couple quick notes on troubleshooting. This is a browser-based webinar platform. I'm sure many of you have used it before, especially our members and CFCS certified folks who I saw on the line. But if this is your first time, on 24's browser-based, so if you're running into issues with audio, visual, slides not advancing, try refreshing your browser. That's going to be your first and best step. If the issues persist, close out your browser tabs and other applications. Sometimes it's an application issue, and you can try rejoining. If you have issues beyond that, you could also try switching browsers. Chrome and Firefox are generally the ones with the best results. For those ACFCS members on the line, you will be able to access a recording of this presentation. It is being recorded. It will be shared with members, along with a version of the slide deck, although today, just so everyone knows, is very much a discussion-based session. We're going to be focused on conversation, on dialogue between some great presenters, and not so much focused on a slide deck. But you will get a recording, so you want to access that after the presentation. There's a short survey at the end of the webinar. Definitely fill that out. Let us know your feedback and thoughts, and please let us know topics you want to see in future presentations. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, Q&A. Please ask questions. I see some of you are already exercising your right to ask questions, which is great. Please continue to do so. And we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. So I really want to hear from you. With that, I would like to introduce, one more thing. We will be doing a few polling questions. So I'm going to put those up. They should appear right there in the slide view window where you're seeing the slides right now. And you can respond to them right there. Click the button of the response that you choose and hit that submit button. If you don't see a submit button, you might have to scroll down. There should be a scroll bar on the right-hand side. So we're about to do one of those, but before we get there, I'd like to introduce John O'Neill, who will be our moderator and really leading the conversation. He is with Silent 8, and he has a depth of experience in the world of data analytics and AI and machine learning, about 25 years of experience in this field, which it's a relatively new field, so that's about as long as anybody that I've run into. So again, John, thanks for being here. Let me go ahead and throw the poll on the screen, and I'm going to kick it over to you.
Brian, thank you so much for that warm introduction, and good morning from Chicago. I am John O'Neill. I am the moderator of this panel, which means that I am looking forward to asking a lot of questions. I'm not the guy you want to be listening to on this panel. I am here, like just about everybody else, to listen and learn, and I'm looking forward to doing that. Let's start off, as Brian suggested, with that first poll question. This was submitted by Ray Blake on our team. You're going to meet him in just a minute, but I think it's a great question. We'd like to ask you, how would you describe your firm's present approach to ongoing KYC and periodic review? So we'd like you to answer this as honestly as you can. You should be able to go ahead and interact directly with this on your screen. At the end of sort of the action portion of our session, where we've sort of wrapped up our discussion, we're going to come back to this and we're going to have a look at the answers, and this will hopefully give us and you a snapshot of the attendees and hopefully a snapshot of what's going on in the industry. With that, I want to bring it back to the panel. We've got a lot to talk about today, and we have an extremely auspicious group of people to do it with. Once again, I want to start with a group of introductions. I'll start with myself. I am indeed John O'Neill. I am the Senior Vice President of Sales at a company called Silent8. We build custom artificial intelligences to adjudicate alerts. I want to hand it off to my first panel member, Sujata. Sujata, welcome.
Thank you, Joan, and hello, everyone. I'm Sujata. In my current role with Tata Consultancy Services, I head the Global Advisory for Financial Anti-Crimes, where we cover the entire spectrum of KYC, CDD, fraud, AML, sanctions, anti-bribery, corruption, and so on. I've had a career spanning over 2 decades, initially as a banker, and then I moved on to IT services and consulting, and I worked extensively in the area of financial anti-crimes. During this journey, I've worked across various global financial hubs, from New York to London, Singapore, Hong Kong, Frankfurt, and in the Nordics. Now I'm based in the beautiful city of Stockholm in Sweden. And during this journey, I've had the opportunity to witness how compliance has evolved over the last 20 years, both in terms of regulations across these various jurisdictions, and also how technology has shaped this whole change in compliance. It's indeed a very interesting topic for discussion, and look forward to it. Denitsa?
Hello, everyone. I'm Denitsa, and I am based currently in Warsaw, Poland. For the last 5 years, I've been working in AML and compliance, and currently I'm here as an independent compliance expert. But I am still working in the field, and I'll be talking today mostly as someone who is using KYC on an ongoing basis, almost daily. And additionally, to supplement my career in compliance, during the pandemic, I started a podcast, Compliance Time. The podcast looks for interesting projects or also creative work that people in compliance do, such as books, videos, blogs, anything. So I try to get this more fun and interesting part also from compliance. And many thanks for Silent8 for inviting me to this webinar. I hope I can add up with my experience to the discussion. And I would like to pass the presentation time for Ray.
Thank you, Denitsa. Hi, everyone. I'm Ray Blake. I'm half of the Dark Money Files, a specialist anti-financial crime firm. Many people will know us for our podcast, also called the Dark Money Files. And that's a podcast that came about as an offhand idea in a quiet period, which has kind of acquired a life of its own, really. We write, we speak, we broadcast, we consult, we advocate on anti-financial crime topics. And our podcast is now in its 5th season, with new episodes coming out every couple of weeks.
Ray, fantastic. In fact, thanks to everybody for that, for those rousing introductions. We've got a lot to cover today, so I'm going to go ahead and kick it off. We have just under an hour now, and we want to cover 3 distinct topics. The title of this panel is The Case for Ongoing KYC, Why the Time for Change is Now. And we want to start off by asking just what is ongoing KYC. We want to define it a little bit. And in fact, while we're doing that, define the problem. talk about the current state of KYC, Know Your Customer. We're going to spend about 12 to 15 minutes doing that. Part 2 of the panel, we want to move on from the problem itself to solutions. What efforts are being made? And what needs to change in this industry to really bring the promise of continuous KYC to bear? Again, we're going to aim for about 10, 12 minutes for that. And then finally, we want to wrap up by talking about the future. And the future for a lot of people means the role of artificial intelligence and other technologies. What are they? How can they help? What are the things we need to worry about? And what are the changes we can expect? And again, we're going to aim for about 10 to 12 minutes on that. Lastly, we're going to close off the panel with what we hope is a rousing 10 to 12 minutes of Q&A, and that'll be based on your questions. So once again, down at the bottom is a slot for you to ask those questions, and we encourage you to do that. Having said all that, I want to come back to that promise I made, which is to start off by defining the problem. What is perpetual KYC? I've heard it called different things: ongoing KYC, real-time, continuous, dynamic. Do they all mean the same thing? Sujata, I'd like to start with you. Can you give us an industry definition of ongoing or perpetual KYC?
Sure, John. So traditionally, what banks have been doing is once they risk profile their customers into high, medium, or low, then it's the periodic reviews of the customers are based on this risk rating. So as a rule of thumb, for a high risk customer, it's a review after 1 year, medium risk customer after 3 years, and low risk customer after 5 years. Now, 3 years, 1 year, 5 years, these are all very long periods of time during which customers, the customer profiles, their customer behavior, a lot of their anticipated activities, their sources of funds, wealth, they undergo a lot of change during these 3 to 5 years. So what the industry is looking at now in terms of the names that you mentioned just now, perpetual KYC, ongoing, continuous, real-time, dynamic. So what all of these concepts attempt to do is, instead of waiting for those 3 or 5 years, keep doing a customer review every time there is a change in the customer profile. Anything there is, that is material to for the bank to know that there is a material change in the profile of the customer, be it in his address or the structure, organization structure, or in terms of its beneficiaries, the jurisdictions, the different countries that they are operating in. So any sort of difference in the customer profile, which the bank should know about. So instead of waiting for it for 5 years or 3 years, make the change or do the review so that the change is reflected in the bank's records as near to real time as possible. So, in IT parlance, if we have to call it, do it in agile sprint method. Do it on a continuous basis rather than waiting for a big bang at the end of 3 or 5 years.
Got it. Makes sense. Thank you, Sujata. Denise, I think you're the only member of this panel who's actually a user, at least on a day-to-day basis, of KYC. Can you elaborate a little bit on the definition that Sujata gave and tell us how you define it?
Yes, of course. So to start off, KYC is a tool that contains data. So its main purpose is to give us information of the particular client, right? And as a KYC user, this data for us in the industry is very important to be accurate and to be received in time. So when you're reviewing a certain kind of case file record, for us, it needs to be up to date. And you can imagine that for someone classified as a lower risk client, this KYC will not be super up to date if the period of review is 5 years, for example. For me, ongoing KYC, or any of the term that you prefer, perpetual or real time, this combines 3 main components. This combines the client data that has been received and provided to the bank. There are also some kind of external data and sources and maybe paid membership sources that are input into that, let's call it, sphere, I don't know. And finally, we'll have transactional data and other reports. So it's like a bigger ecosystem that produces a good portion of data that can be used for the analysis of people like me working in compliance, or even to provide when you're reporting to your regulator, for example.
Thank you, Denise. That was terrific. Ray, I want to come back to you. I listened to your podcast. You you said something a while ago that really caught my attention because I thought it was bang on the money. And I'm going to go, if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and quote from you. You said that professional criminals have an immaculate KYC file, right? We can't, they know what they're doing. You said we can't catch the bad guys at the door. We can only catch them when they don't do what they said they're going to do. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you picked up on that because, you know, it's a really, really crucial point. And KYC itself, the know your customer part of the equation, isn't an end in itself. It enables us to do the next thing, which I think we're going to come on and talk about. But any professional money launderer worth their salt, when they approach your institution or your bank, will have an absolutely immaculate set of very, very plausible records. They probably won't be fakes. They'll be real documents because they've got lots and lots of money and huge resources to spend on getting the real thing. So they'll probably be real. But the trouble is, when you meet them, when you onboard them, they lie to you. They have to lie to you because what they want to do with your organization is not something you would allow them to do. So they have to tell you that they're going to do something different that sounds legitimate. And they've got all the paperwork to prove that and evidence that that's how they're set up. So that KYC file has to form the backdrop of a very active process by which you continually check that what you're seeing from that client, the activity on their accounts, the behavior within and outside their relationship with you continues to conform to that picture that they've painted for you and that you've helped colour in through your independent research when they come to you. Because when they go bad, when they stop behaving the way you expect them to, they will do it very quickly and in a huge way. And if you don't respond to it very quickly, millions or billions can go through your institution of illicit funds, which, you know, in most jurisdictions of the world, increasingly, you as a banker are going to be on the hook for.
Right. So I find this a fascinating part of the entire discussion, right? And I'd like to open it up to the other panelists, Sujata and Denitsa. If what Ray is saying is true, and I believe it is, if the criminals are, you know, of all the customers at a bank are the ones who are most likely to have a flawless KYC file, can we catch them? How do we stop them? And what do we need to do it?
Of course. I mean, I completely agree with Ray here. It's not always that, you know, when a customer is onboarding the bank, he is a rogue. It can also happen that, you know, when he is onboarded, I mean, an individual or an entity, when they're onboarded, they may be perfectly legitimate customers, but it just takes an instant or a single transaction to turn rogue, right? So, you know, I think all financial institutions have to be on their toes to, you know, continuously monitor whether what the customer had signed up for is the actual behavior that the institution is witnessing. And for that, of course, there are multiple systems that institutions have been employing. I mean, I can take one example here. I mean, the very recent case of Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, I think we're all familiar in the financial crimes world about the Jeffrey Epstein case. Well, there was a KYC flaw from the Deutsche Bank side when they onboarded that customer. There was a flaw itself. We all know about it. But if we ignore that portion, even during his Jeffrey Epstein's term as a customer of Deutsche Bank, there were several red flags which could have been identified if the bank was, you know, if they had those processes in place and if they had taken action on them. To cite some examples, like John, you mentioned, how is it possible? There were a lot of adverse media reports about Jeffrey Epstein. You know, he was convicted in child abuse case. He was involved in sex trafficking and so on. So there were several other negative reports about him in the media. That could have been a red flag. That was the external source I'm talking about. Looking at the bank's own transaction data, there were so many payments made through Jeffrey Epstein's account, which were meant for, you know, payments to Russian models and young women. And the reason for the payments were meant to be rents and tuition fees and miscellaneous expenses. Now, was this really matching with Jeffrey Epstein's known nature of business? that was something which should have triggered a red flag. So, what I mean to say is these are the ongoing red flags which banks should be able to detect and then take some action on it. So it's not just enough to identify the trigger, it's also required to take action on that trigger.
I think that's a great point. And I'd like to follow along on this thread. Denitsa, you had said a while ago that KYC isn't just, know your customer. It's really know your criminal. And I think that's a great quote. It goes right back to the Jeffrey Epstein example that Sujata gave. Can you elaborate on that? Can you tell us a little bit more about what it means to know your criminal?
Yeah, exactly. First of all, credit goes to a colleague of mine who always was saying that C for the KYC stands for criminal, not for client or customer. So that's really stuck with me throughout the whole period. I understand it this way that you have to know what the criminals are currently doing. If you want to detect and identify crimes such as human trafficking or sex trafficking, you have to know some of the flags there. So this means know your criminal, know how the criminals are operating, know how what kind of tactics they employ. Not only, all right, this is Mr. X, he lives in the US, he works as waiter, and that's it. And this finishes the story. Another example also there are many examples in which it looks like that we have missed in the compliance profession money laundering or sanctions evasion when they were in front of us, just missing some of the red flags or some of the indicators that could do that. And if I have one extra minute, I would like to share the example of a company called Advantage Alliance. It's not a famous company. It's not a big company. This company opened an account in a UK bank in 2008. After that, between 2012 and 2016, it moved some £60 million between accounts. And in 2016, the bank started internal investigation. In the meantime, they were also reporting some of the activity of that company. But internal investigation starts in 2016. And I believe this year is not a coincidental, and this is the year when Panama Papers broke. So basically, this prompted a huge amount of reviews across the industry. And 6 months after that internal investigation, that bank decided to close the account of the said Advantage Alliance company. It turned out in July this year, an investigation by the US Senate accused the Rothenbergs, the individuals sanctioned as Russian oligarchs and in the circle of Putin, for moving a lot of money and art in order to evade sanctions. And in that period between 2012 and 2016, when this vehicle was operating sort of undetected, sort of unpunished, this was also part of not only money laundering, enabling the Russian oligarchy and etc., but it was also evading the sanctions on the Rothenbergs. And I'm not saying that KYC will completely save this, and in the moment that something happens, we will know. No, but I think we will not have such huge gaps in periods. So 2008, 2012, 2016. So years and years pass, which are enabling criminals to do much more with the financial system, as opposed if we have something on time and intelligence that is faster coming and in more detail.
Got it. Thank you, Denitsa. My next question is for you, Sujata. One of the things you said a while back was about data quality. You told us that most banks have a problem with data based on legacy systems. How big well, let me start with this. How important is data quality, and what can fintechs do to help?
Well, this is such a great question. And like I've always been talking to, whenever we discuss about KYC, I've always mentioned that KYC is the backbone of the entire financial anti-crime system. If you look at all the other functions, say your AML, sanctions, fraud, the centerpiece is always the customer. So what are we checking? Whether we are checking a fraudulent behavior for a customer. Are we, when we are looking at sanction screening, again, we are screening the customer, transactions of the customer. So customer is always the central piece for all of these functions. And it's absolutely essential that data about the customer, which the financial institution is maintaining, should be accurate, complete, and a full 360-degree view of the customer should be available. Now, coming to this problem about legacy systems, why legacy banks have this problem. So if we look at most large banks globally, they have been there for at least 150 to 200 years. And over this period of time, they have evolved. I mean, there have been mergers, acquisitions, organic, inorganic growth, and then they have expanded in so many ways. And they have been saddled with a lot of legacy systems. So a lot of banks have, they may be operating in 90 different countries and having, say, like 50 different onboarding systems. So the data is siloed. Now, even for the same customer, I mean, I can give my own example. The bank where I maintain a relationship, I have separate customer ID for my retail banking relationship, another customer ID for my cards relationship, and a third customer ID for my securities relationship. So this gives me the idea that I am sitting in my bank as 3 different customers. And I can bet on it that they might have all inconsistent data sets, because I have onboarded these different products or lines of businesses at different points of time. And even their KYC, the data that they have collected from me have been all different. So it's highly likely that all these data, though they all relate to me, but they are inconsistent. And it could be that, they don't match. So this is the problem with most large banks, that data is siloed. This prevents for the bank to have a 360-degree view of a customer. So the example that I took of myself, I mean, no single entity and no single department has the full view, because I have 3 different customer IDs. So how are they connecting it? So now that is a problem which results in non-availability of a single customer view, a single entity view, as we call it. The other problem is, even in each system, there are data quality issues. For example, the data may be out of date is one. Data could be inconsistent or inaccurate. There could be, there's a lot of dummy data at times, because when we have submitted our documents and forms in a written documents, and then they are input. I mean, there is a data entry activity which happens at the back end of the bank. So there could be that they have just filled in some dummy data because they didn't have that information right away, but they had to complete the process. So there are a lot of instances where they just input some data in order to complete that process, but that may not be accurate. So, these are the various data quality issues which the banks face. Now, when we look at all the other functions, like I said, whether it's screening or monitoring or fraud, for all these functions, what is required is aggregation of transaction behavior. Like we just said that a behavior of a customer is determined by the type of transactions that he does versus the type of transactions that he has signed up with the bank. Now, if the bank is not able to tie up all of these different transactions to the particular customer, then KYC for that particular customer remains fragmented. So the bank does not know, me as a customer, what is the overall activity that I am doing with the bank. So that becomes a problem.
Thank you. Ray, I keep quoting from you, and I think it's because you just keep hitting it on the head. One of the things you said, I think you said this last week. I don't know if it was on your podcast or when we were talking, but you said that consolidating and updating data systems at a bank is a big undertaking, and you're absolutely right. I know that some banks are moving towards consolidated client views. Can that help?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Sujata just summarized the problem that we have incredibly well. I mean, the dream, the goal of perpetual KYC, as you've described it, and as the other panelists have described it, is that we are able, from a central location, without getting out of bed almost, to reach out to all of these external data sources and gather a large amount of accurate, consistent up-to-date data that relates to an identifiable client. And the problem for most banks is they can't even do that internally with their own databases, oftentimes. So many of them are rushing, exactly as Sujata described, to have a consolidated golden source of data which is reliable and usable across the organization. And that's really crucial. And one of the reasons why it's crucial and why fintechs really need to engage in this fight is that at the moment, 95% of all anti-financial crime alerts that come into the first line of defense, the second line of defense, whoever, 95% of them are discountable quite easily because they don't relate to the client or because what we already know about the client allows us to simply discount them. But a very large proportion of that 95% is, no, that's not our client. But we actually need to go quite deeply into our data at the moment to be definitive about that. And there needs to be a better way of doing it. Of course, the problem is that any move that the banks make to clean up, to tidy, to consolidate their own data is often frustrated by the fact that business as usual can't stop while they do it. I mean, it's hard enough changing out your car's transmission, but try doing it while you're doing 60 miles an hour at the same time in the fast lane.
That's another quote. I'm going to write that one down, Ray. You are a man with great quotes. There's no doubt about it. You know, I think we could keep talking about the nature of the problem. You know, we could easily fill up the whole hour with that, but we're already well past sort of the halfway mark. And I think I'm going to jump ahead and move to part two of the session, which is the solutions, right? And Ray, I think I'm going to come back to you again. Let's start with, you know, in part two, at least, the point is really to talk about what efforts banks are making to implement continuous KYC today. And, you know, in many cases, the answer might be none. Ray, let's hand it over to you, man. I want to talk a little bit about efforts in the UK to create this KYC utility arrangement.
Yeah, absolutely. So the UK, where I'm based, was trying to be an early adopter of this whole technology piece, and a number of programs, of pilot programs, began in around 2012, 2013. Which they called KYC utilities. And the four main ones at the time were offered by Thomson Reuters, there was SWIFT, there was DTCC, and there was Market Genpact. And they all arose around the same time. Different banks had different stakes in each of them, and different banks signed up to different programs. And therein lay part of the problem, because the idea was that these utilities would hold the data for, in most cases, a corporate client. The corporate would sign up with this utility. It would say, great, we'll give you all of our data. You can have a feed and it will stay up to date. And then any bank that legitimately needs this information, you can give it to them. So, you know, for large and even medium-sized corporates with complex sets of banking relationships, this was handy. They could fire and forget. They could do it once. Unfortunately, it was fragmented across a number of providers who didn't talk to each other. So you were reliant on all the banks that you wanted to deal with being with the utility that you'd signed up for. Well, that turned out to be kind of a bit of a recipe for slow take-up. And that's exactly what happened. But I think that there's much more encouraging news. In 2019, 6 of the Nordic banks teamed up to say, let's just do one of these. Let's all do it. And that's going great guns. But what they found was, and what we found with the utility program was, to make this work really well, you have to have fairly closely aligned KYC and due diligence standards, and indeed risk appetites between the different organizations. Because if you just take one practical problem, for instance, if my bank is only interested in UBO information for owners of more than 25% of an entity, whereas my partner bank which has a different risk appetite, different standards, is interested in UBOs right down to 10 or 15%, then one of us is going to be frustrated by this common data store, because the common data store will either work on 10% or it will work on 25%. If it works on 10%, and I'm a 25% bank, then I'm seeing stuff that I don't really want to see, I don't need to see, will increase my cost if I see it, and I can't unsee it. Whereas the other way round, the bank that isn't getting all the information it needs then has to do a secondary reach out to the client to get that top-up information, and then much of the time saving, much of the synergies are lost. And are you then much better off? Well, unless you've got a very closely aligned approach to KYC and due diligence, perhaps not. We're also kind of largely reliant on registries being open and publicly available for lots of this to properly work. But I mean, all of these things are eminently solvable and fixable, and are being worked on as we speak.
So, John, I want to come back to you, and I want to ask you a specific question. I know the financial institutions have started adopting what they call event-driven reviews, these condition and rule-based triggers. Is that a step towards perpetual KYC?
Well, absolutely, John, because as we were discussing earlier, that this frequency of 1 year, 3 years, and 5 years is too much of a, in terms of time period, especially in current times when everything changes in a matter of days. So, moving from that, 3 years, 5 years to something more of an event-driven is, I would say, still a step towards, if not completely, the perpetual KYC. In my experience, what I've been seeing is there are, like you mentioned, the rule-based triggers that the banks are defining. These are, events. For example, it could be events triggered by external data, or events triggered by some information which the customer themselves have reported, or something which the bank internally has identified. So to give you some example, it could be, triggers could be something like customers may have informed something about, a change in ownership structure, or they would have opened a new branch office somewhere else, or some new, in terms of nature of business, they have moved on to some other kind of business. So these are something which could be reported by the customers themselves. In terms of internal data, maybe the bank would have identified that normally a particular customer was transacting with a few set of countries which they had already mentioned. But now you see some transactions with countries of high risk. So this could trigger an maybe it is a genuine transaction. So what is the reason that he now has to have a regular transaction with a high-risk country? So this is a trigger which could be identified from the bank's internal data, right? The transactions that it is monitoring. It could also be triggered from some third-party data sources also, like the adverse media reports I was mentioning to you. So these are various red flags or the triggers which banks are now defining. And it's not really, dynamic or real time, but I've seen banks, they are doing this monitoring on at least a monthly basis. So on a monthly basis, they try to check for these red flags, whether anything has changed between what was the customer profile and whatever changes they have identified during these past 1 month. And they're trying to review that what has changed this month. So though these are not as, dynamic as you would expect, but it is still, I would say, a step towards a perpetual or an ongoing KYC.
Thank you, Sujata. Denise, I want to bring you into this as well. A while back, I think when we first had one of our first meetings on this topic, you mentioned that Bank of America has some 60 million small business clients, and that it's virtually impossible to maintain good KYC in them all. What's the solution? I mean, how do we cope with a situation like that?
Yeah, what I think is that sometimes we forget the size of the industry that we work with, because, you think of the clients of the bank and you think of a certain segment, you think of yourself maybe as an individual, but when you look at the scale, it's huge. And I think the solution should be somehow more technology enabled, because currently a lot of resources are being not wasted, but let's say a lot of resources are being used in order to know all these millions of customers of each bank. And I think that we as humans often figure out various solutions that can affect our resources to be focused on something that is more important for the industry. If it's for the sales industry, you need to know your client in order to sell them more products. For the KYC, for the financial crime industry, you need to know your criminals so you can prevent them to use the products of the bank for their illicit gains. So basically, the know your customer can be used in many different variations, but in any industry, you need to know who you're dealing with after all, right?
Oh, that's a good answer. Thank you. And I want to come back to you again in the next section. So we're at about the 40-minute mark. We've got about 5 to 10 minutes left in the sort of presentation stage of the panel. So I think I want to jump ahead to the future. Part 3 is when we promised to talk a little bit about the future. And as I said earlier, a lot of the hope and aspirations of the entire industry revolve around artificial intelligence and other technologies that we hope can sort of remove capacity issues around solving alerts and adjudicating these alerts. Capacity right now is the limiting factor, and AI does have the potential to sort of enable perpetual KYC by just taking capacity off the table. I'd like to ask each one of the panelists about to take what their take is on the role of artificial intelligence. And Denise, I want to come back and start with you. I mean, so let me focus the question, right? By freeing up capacity among the analysts that work for you and sort of gathering information from all these various sources, how can AI help identify criminals?
I think by automating some of the processes and receiving the data that is well prepared, well organized, you will spend less time in organizing or looking through websites on the internet or trying to find out something. You'll be looking and analyzing already what's been given, and you'll be assessing it from the point that you are there for, to be a financial crime analyst or professional in any kind of department, that it's not just gathering the data and writing something up, but it's just really using your capabilities and what you already know to identify and stop the criminals from using the banking system. So that's how I see the role of AI, to really assist and help the people working in the industry.
Beautiful, thank you. So, John, I want to come back to you. You said about 10 minutes ago that one of the big problems facing banks is, that they're siloed. Each one of these, each group has an individual silo, and of course, there's own data. Can AI help address that?
Yes, John, AI is a favorite topic of mine, and I know you're an expert in AI yourself, so I think we could talk for hours on this, but just limiting our discussion to, how AI can help in this. So yes, data is fragmented, as we all concur on that in most large legacy banks, they have multiple onboarding systems, multiple, data stores. So the first thing that needs to be done is break the silos. You bring them all together into one common, golden source, call it customer master data or a data warehouse, call it whatever you will, but it has to be a common a database for all your customer data. And only then can you do anything. Any AI can work only on top of that, because you cannot expect AI to be, covering multiple systems. So once all your data is in one place, so you have this entire set of data to work with. Of course, it would need a standardized data model, because every source system, the siloed systems that we are talking about, they might have their own data models, the different data attributes that are resting in each of these. So it may not be consistent when you want to move them into a common data warehouse. So that needs to be standardized. Of course, that is a given. Now, once you have that in place, the first thing that is being done is about resolving entities, resolving multiple profiles of a single entity, and bringing a single entity view or a 360-degree view that I was just talking about. So that is something where AI is highly capable. And so that is something, where you have all your data in place, you put that layer of analytics, and you have that single entity view. Now, this can be used by the rest of the rest of the systems which are using this customer data. So rather than using these siloed data, the other rest of the screening or monitoring systems can now use this customer master data, which has this entity rolled up view. So that is definitely, solves one problem. So in the first place, it has solved the data model, the inconsistency problem. And in the second layer, it has solved your single entity view. Of course, in terms of data remediation, when we talk about, inaccurate data or missing data, there also AI can help, because we are seeing a lot of customers, a lot of banks opening up, customer self-service portals. So the banks don't have to keep following up with your customers. So, the customers don't have to come to the branch or send their documents, and analysts have to, then enter it in their systems. There is this AI-enabled system now where you open up this portal of customer self-service, and the customers, either through their mobile banking apps or through their online banking applications, they can they can update their own customer information, of course, with supporting documents. So they become responsible for remediating their own data quality issue. So, that power rests in the customer's hands. So, once that is done, you have your entity resolution in place. Now, one more, concept that is coming up now very strongly. Again, banks have realized that the financial crimes is not something which is committed by individuals alone. It is an organized crime, and they work in networks. So network visualization is also possible using AI, as John, you are anyways an expert on the subject. So network visualization is something which identifies how your own customers are linked, if at all, if they are linked to any criminals. And if they are, how close or distant are they, in terms of hops, when, they count it in terms of hops. So if you are farther away from that central criminal network, if you're very far away, I think, the bank would classify them as, low risk. But if they are very close to that criminal network, then, of course, they would be considered high risk. So apart from entity resolution, AI can also help in identifying the criminal networks from this, common data warehouse. So I think these two...
No, that's a great answer. Thank you very much. We're at about the 47-minute mark, and I want to make sure we leave time at the end for questions. And I especially want to get to the results of that poll. I'm very interested to see those answers on what folks are doing today. I think we got about 45 seconds to wrap it up, and for that, I want to turn to the man with the quotes. Ray, I'm going to ask you to bring us home. No pressure, but in 45 seconds or so, what can you tell us about the role of AI in the future in solving KYC?
Oh, okay, right. No pressure then. Right now, prior to the AI era, which we're now solidly in, tech was about doing things that we could already do faster. What AI gives us the promise of is doing things that we can't do now. And if we're not looking at doing things we can't do, we're wasting the potential of AI. And I know that's something, John, that you're determined not to do.
I knew you'd come with a great quote, and that's a fantastic one. I wrote that one down. Thank you, Ray. I think that's gonna wrap up. That's going to wrap up the theatrical portion of the panel with the input from the panelists themselves. I'd like to now to sort of turn it over to questions. I'd like to let's read the questions and then ask those of the panelists themselves. So, Brian, let's go back to you. Let's see if we can't get the results of that poll up.
Yep. Let's see how we did here. So I just put the poll results up on the screen. This is the first poll from earlier. How would you describe your firm's present approach to ongoing KYC and periodic review? And it looks like the overwhelming favorite is largely manual or human with some automated elements at about 46%. Second most popular at a much lower percentage is entirely automated, about 16%, entirely automated in some situations, and entirely manual or human at about 10%. So any surprises there? Anything jump out at you?
Not for me. Any panelists have any see anything surprising in these results?
That's what we see.
I would say, yeah, it's an expected one. So.
Yeah. Let's go to the next question, Brian.
Yep. So I will throw that up. And this one is, what is the appetite of your firm for introducing automation or further automation to ongoing review and periodic review? So just like before, go ahead and select the answer right there on the slide view window. And I think we're going to let this run for a few seconds, give you a chance to respond while we transition into the Q&A.
Fantastic. So I've got the Q&A up, and I want to start. I think I can get to a few of these at least. I want to start with a question from Anthony Edwards, and the question is: having an organization as a customer, or what is on what is KYC done? The organization or the persons operating that organization? So this is a great question. It has to do with when you're doing KYC, and if your customer is a small business, do you do KYC on the business or the individuals? So let's throw that out to the panelists. Anybody want to take that one?
I can answer that. I mean, I can attempt
Please.
to start with the answer. So, for any financial institution, there are two broad categories of customers. One would be your individuals, and the other would be your entities. Now, in your entities, there would be corporates or government bodies or embassies and money service businesses and so on. Anything other than an individual, which is a legal entity. Now, when you talk about onboarding a legal entity is different from the people who run it. So for them, the KYC follows a different set of questionnaires. I mean, for an individual, where people like you and me, for us, there would be a different set of questionnaire while onboarding. That is pretty small a list, probably just about 200 questions. But for legal entities like corporates or other business organizations, where the amount of documentation, the amount of questions is much more broader. It could be up to 600 data attributes as well, and of course the amount of documents that are required to support all of these information is also much more broader. So there's a lot more that goes on in onboarding a legal entity. In addition to the legal entity's own information, for example, for us it would be country of domicile, country of citizenship, where are you residing, and so on. Whereas for the entities, it would be country of incorporation, country of where all they are operating, and so on. I mean, I'm just trying to draw a parallel. In addition to all of those questions for the organization itself, there would be a separate set of questions for the associated parties, because a company cannot run on its own. It has to be run by some people. So who are those people who would be involved in that company? So it could be a board of directors or authorized signatories or power of attorneys and so on. So there is a separate section around beneficial owners, associated parties. So that is a subset which is done along with the KYC of that entity. So that covers both the sections.
Good answer. Thank you, Sujata. I've got several questions here from someone who's been pretty attentive. Anil Kumar. I'm gonna pick one that I think is quite interesting. I'm going to put this out to all the panelists. The question is: I've been hearing about AI and perpetual KYC as a future dream for the last 3+ years. Are there any banks that have good use cases that have progressed in perpetual KYC? Anyone want to give an example?
I can give you the opposite. I can give you some examples where it's not gone terribly well at all.
I'll take it. Tell us, Ray.
It's not gone terribly well. If you look at my country, if you look at the UK, we have a number of banks who have kind of flirted with the idea of perpetual KYC, and it's tended to happen at the low risk end of cases. So earlier on, Sujata was talking about maybe a 3 or a 5 year timescale for a low risk review. So what you have is a number of banks proposing that, look, rather than getting these out once every 5 years and dusting them off and having a proper review, how about we completely ignore them unless something changes? And the regulator has been quite open to that idea in the UK and said, yeah, okay, how will you assure that if something changes, you know about it? And that's actually a question that some of the banks in the UK, including some of the biggest and most technologically advanced banks in the UK, have struggled to answer. Not that they haven't got good answers for how they'll find out, but they haven't got an answer that will convince the regulator that those are reliable systems for being sure. Because the problem is that their internal data quality can sometimes be the weak link in this. And John, I think we're going to have a discussion at some point about turning these AIs inwards and saying maybe the first job of this AI is to do some internal cleansing because the people aren't capable of doing it clearly.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I think we can get fit at least 2 more questions in, so we're going to jump into them. I've got one here from Malik Zinedine, and this is a great question, and I'll if you don't mind, I'll take a stab at answering it. The question is, are there any financial institutions that have started to use AI in compliance today? And I think that's an easy one. It's a nice softball question. Thank you, Malik. And the answer is absolutely. Just speaking as for Silent 8 alone, our AIs are used by over 60 jurisdictions around the world. We're used by Standard Chartered Bank in the jurisdictions that most folks care about. In the United States and others, we are deeply involved with two big commercial rollouts that will be announced. You'll be hearing about those very shortly. And again, these are large global banks that will be announcing. So stay tuned. There's a lot going on behind the scenes that obviously we're excited to talk about, and you will be learning about it. And it's certainly not just Silent 8. AI is being embraced, and certainly even cloud-based AI is being embraced in a way that hasn't before. I want to move quickly to the next question. This is from Vic Ezekian, and this is directed directly at you, Sujata. And the question is, okay. Sujata, can you elaborate on the reference you made on the 360-degree view?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, and thank you for directing it to me so that others don't get a chance to answer that. I recall when I spoke about it, I gave the example of me resting as 3 different customers in my bank. For any particular bank, if there is a single person or a single customer who is resting in 3 different profiles, then the bank is not able to aggregate all that information and attribute it to that, to one single customer. Now, as we know, a lot of, transaction monitoring rules are aggregation based. So if I have to sit in a bank as 3 different customers, I could easily manipulate the rules, because if I want to avoid the $10,000 threshold, I would, transact through my 3 different profiles. So if the bank is not able to identify that all of these 3 profiles belong to the same person, then I would just go scot-free. My transactions will not be reported as a suspicious activity because I've tried to manipulate it. But if, through these entity resolution or this 360-degree view that I mentioned, where, again, AI is being used to enable this, the bank is able to identify that these 3 customer profiles belong to actually the same person. So all the transactions that are happening from 3 different accounts roll up to the same single entity. And as long as my profile was siloed, my 3 transactions would never get reported. But now, through the entity resolution as a single entity view, all my transactions which roll up to this $10,000 will now be reported by the bank, because they all have been done by me. They have been conducted by me. So, that is what I meant by having a single customer view. That is, all the different profiles the same customer has across the various lines of businesses, across various product relationships, all should be able to be rolled up into one. I hope I answered that question, John.
I think you did very well. We've got time to, if we rush, we can answer one more, and I'm going to try and do it. And it is from Sarab Saraswat, and I think this is a fantastic question. The question is, we discussed bringing the fragmented data from multiple sources into a single database. How can organizations deal with concerns of privacy, confidentiality, and the case of sharing data with other organizations, with other departments, and cost challenges faced by organizations in streamlining the data in a standardized form? That's a tough one. Who wants to take that one?
Well, I think that's
comment on that. Okay. But go on.
Yeah. Ray,
okay. Well, Well, I'm happy to start answering it, but I haven't got the whole answer completely. The first thing is dirty data costs far more money to keep than it does to clean up. It's a huge expense and a millstone around firms' necks having fragmented and dirty data. Yes, you spend a little bit of money getting it right, but you start saving vast amounts of money immediately that you make any steps in that direction. So that's the first thing. The second thing is about concerns of privacy and confidentiality, which are very, very real and very important. And in the compliance space, there are great steps being made at the moment in technologies like homomorphic encryption, which allow data sharing without breaking privacy rules and indeed laws that apply in many jurisdictions, and yet still enable different firms, sometimes across different jurisdictions, to share crucial information to prevent financial crime. And I can't think of a better reason why not. And we do have to get this right as firms, because all of the money and resources that confusion is costing internally is hurting not the bank and its shareholders, although it does a little bit, but it's killing customer service in these organisations. You go and ask the chief executives, and one of their biggest concerns is going to be, we are spending so much money doing the right thing, and it's important that we do the right thing as far as financial crime is concerned, but the people who are losing out are our customers, because we can't do that and give them the kind of service that we want to with limited resources.
I would love to keep answering these questions, but we are out of time. And with that, I want to hand it back to you, Brian. I think do we have time to go through the last answers to the last poll question?
Yeah, let's see how we did. So I threw the last one on the screen during the Q&A here, and it's if we can save significant manual effort in automating our ongoing KYC, what are we going to get out of this? And it looks like the most popular answer is more effective periodic reviews and investigations. Better customer service was the second most popular answer, to go back to Ray's point. So there's a recognition of that too out there, but people are really, really keen on the potential for more effective periodic reviews and investigations, which makes sense. So just want to thank everyone for a very lively, interesting, and thoughtful conversation on what is clearly a critically important topic. I want to thank our very engaged audience for all of their questions, too. We had a tremendous number of questions and a lot of very good ones. And we are capturing all of these questions. We will share them with our presenters and panelists. So if they do have a chance to answer offline or just for their own reference, don't worry, your question will not be lost if we didn't get to it today. So thanks again to everyone for attending. Thanks again to Sujata, Denitsa, Ray, and John for a fantastic presentation. With that, we will call it a day, and have a great rest of the week. Great rest of the day, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.